Hey everybody, Tony D with a Piney podcast, a political Piney podcast about politics in New Jersey and the upcoming governor election. Smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Please check out my books, links in the description, including Hollywoke, another novel, and Wokeistan, a novel, political satire. So those of you who have tuned into my channel before and watched some of my political stuff pretty much know my deal, but I'll just briefly go over it. I am a libertarian. I am not a fan of Phil Murphy by any stretch, and I'm here to talk about him today and why you shouldn't vote for him. Now, some of you out there, probably not many, might be Democrats. Understand that Phil Murphy is a Obama Democrat. He was the German ambassador under the Obama administration. He has a mansion in Germany, in Italy, and in New Jersey. And, he's considered a stand-up guy in the Democratic Party. Now, he's not by far the worst blue state governor. I totally give him credit on that. I mean, I would pick Murphy all day long over Whitmer, over Cuomo, certainly some of the governors in the Northeast or Northwest. But that all being said, Murphy is just smarter than those guys. He's very good at turning up the heat, and I think his missteps have been small for the most part. That all being said, he's terrible. He really is. He's terrible for the state because Democrats are now just terrible. And you have to admit that if you're in the Democratic Party. I was in the Democratic Party for a lot of years. And granted, I've left, but the Democratic Party is nowhere near what it was back in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s. Prior to the Clintons, it was unions, working man, they struggled. And they struggled for good reason. The Republicans tended to all have the money, and they fought for the little guy, and they got the raw end of the deal a lot of times back in those days. Those days are done. Those days are over. The Democrats of today embrace corporations. They embrace them, and they run interference. The only difference between them and an old school Republican is they virtue signal whenever you call them on anything. And you can see right here, this is Murphy virtue signaling during the pandemic, right at the beginning of the pandemic when they closed your businesses and told you to social distance 6 feet. Here he was out marching, not with Black Lives Matter, but an affiliate group. He was at least smart enough not to do that. The affiliate group, and this is all empty virtue signaling, right? Has anything changed? No, shootings are way up. They're way up. People are out of work. The pandemic continues to be a club by which the government beats us over the head with. And Murphy has always said things like, I want to turn New Jersey into the California of the East Coast. Well, look at California. People are leaving in droves. Gavin Newsom was reelected. He has initiated a mandate in schools. You can't have your kid in a public school in California unless that kid is vaccinated. Right now, it's up to the age of under 12 and up. But if the new FDA emergency measure passes, it will be 5 to 11 will also be included in there. So basically, any kid in a public school will have to be vaccinated or they can't enter the school. And some of you out there might say, well, that's fine. I agree with that. Okay. Imagine, if you would, George W. Bush, if you remember him 20 years ago. Would you mind if he decided some mandates for you and your family to obey so you couldn't use public services if you didn't obey them? Bush funneled money into churches. What if he had a religious, mandate? Would you be okay with that? I don't think it would be. And I think things would be a hell of a lot different if Trump had gotten a second term right after the first one, because you had a lot of Democrats screaming about the Trump vaccine, and now, of course, they They couldn't get enough of them. So this is, in my view, been politicized so badly, and the Democrats have to keep doubling down. Phil Murphy, in my mind, is not a guy who's going to stand up to the Democratic establishment. The only thing I think he's doing now is he's biding his time until he's reelected like Newsom, and then he'll step on the gas. So he'll push the mandates, he'll push probably lockdowns, he'll push some sort of card or ID so you can get into a bar or concert hall or whatever. That's what California's doing. Why wouldn't he do it? If you think it's about economics, I've yet to meet a Democrat that really understands how economics works. The state is broke. He has borrowed billions of dollars. Now, granted, he knew, I guess at some level, if Biden got in, he'd be fine. And he is. I mean, Biden is dumping money on the blue states. But what happens if there isn't a blue president? And what happens to all that money? It's not free. It doesn't magically appear in thin air. It's your money. It's taxpayer money. Just getting it from the federal government doesn't make it like, well, it's free money. No. It's you're paying for it. We are paying for the largesse of these blue states and cities. They go broke, and then the federal government comes along and bails them out when they have a blue president, which they have now. A president that's blue, or blows, depending on how you frame it. Anyhow, this isn't about Biden, but it kind of is, in that Murphy is not going to stand up to Biden. Whatever you think of Republicans or Democrats, they don't typically stand up and call out their own. Sometimes Republicans do. Right now, Republicans, it's the populists versus the neocons and the establishment. They are the new people fighting for the working man. I know, it's weird. It's weird to me. I grew up in a world in which it was the total opposite, but the parties have changed. And I'm not asking you to vote for Jack Citarelli, necessarily. I'm a libertarian. I'm not a Republican, by the way. But I think the difference is this. Citarelli, if the state is a patient and Citarelli and Murphy are the doctors, well, Citarelli might not do much. The patient still may be sick, but he's probably not going to make him much sicker. He's probably not going to do a lot because he has a Democratic state legislature. So even if you vote for Citarelli and you really regret the vote, there's probably not going to be much to regret. Whereas Phil Murphy, once he's reelected, will actively stab the patient. He will actively continue his policies of spending money we don't have. We just don't have it in New Jersey. I mean, property taxes are out of control. All our taxes are very high here. And he's introducing more and more programs. He's not introducing less. He's not cutting any programs. He introduced the insane contract tracers, people who call you on the phone and say, oh, you've been exposed to someone who's been exposed to the virus. And in this day and age, now, like during the days of landlines, that might have been something. But this is the age of smartphones. When my smartphone rings, sometimes it says political call. So I'm not going to answer that. Sometimes it says scam. Sometimes it could say a bunch of different things. I know this, if I don't recognize the number, I probably am not going to answer it, as most people. So it's no wonder that, Murphy was complaining in one of his little talks that something like, I think it was over 60% of people just don't answer the phone. Yeah, no kidding. We have smartphones. Most of the people who answer them are probably older, probably already agree with Murphy, or they have friends in Trenton and said, oh, this might be my friend in Trenton. Oh, I better answer it. Everybody else is like, what? Why am I? Who is this? So understand, he is a Democrat. So he hired 3,000 contact tracers. They got to make a living wage, right? So you're talking $30K a year for 3,000 people. It's millions of dollars when you add the office and benefits and everything else. And And make no mistake, when contact tracing is over, it'll be on to something else. Well, if you can contact trace about COVID, why wouldn't you contact trace about the flu? Why wouldn't you contact trace about all diseases, really? Oh, and as long as you're doing diseases, why not contact trace, help the cops find people who are wanted, or any number of things. This is what Democrats tend to do. They tend to expand government. It's an attempt to buy your vote, but you're paying for it. The state is broke. It's been broke for years and years and years. We've been borrowing money. Are your services better? Is the trash go off your curb quicker? Are your schools amazing? No, of course not. And again, I'm not saying that Jack Citarelli is going to be some panacea. And in fact, Phil Murphy is a Goldman Sachs exec, rich as hell, 3 mansions across the world. Jack Citarelli, probably just as rich. He came out of Goldman Sachs too. The difference is he's a Republican, and he at least has to justify spending. He's at least fiscally responsible because politically he has to be. Politically he's pushed that way. Politically he's the opposite of the Democrats. And yes, he might have to answer to Trump too and the populists. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing because they'll say, well, jobs. They'll say, if Trump says, hey, these vaccines, maybe these companies are making a little too much money, as Trump has made noise about that, maybe he regrets some of his decisions, like making them not liable for anything regarding the vaccines, then Citarelli probably has to sign on to that unless, he's going to be a rogue and go against the Republican Party. Most guys don't. So, Murphy has no compunction about doubling down on Biden's policies. That means he's happy to take in as many migrants as possible. He's happy to entertain defund the police. He may say he's not. I don't believe him. I don't believe these guys for a second. And in fact, in Minnesota, they are actually defunding the police and replacing them with basically social workers, the equivalent of social workers who will answer some calls. Yeah, that'll work out fine until one of them's shot in the face. And then it'll be like, oh, well, maybe the social workers need gun training too, instead of just having cops do it. Or maybe getting everybody employed, which really cut into the crime. Anyhow, you got Murphy here. Again, he is a hypocrite. He was caught going to a bar, and he went inside during a time you weren't supposed to go inside in bars. Now, the inside wasn't open, but he was in there. He was taking pictures, and he just like a lot of Democrats have been caught breaking the rules. Now, not as bad as some other Democrats, but he's been caught. The mask rule, in my mind, is not a great rule because you can't, and you'll remember the Democrats supported not wearing a mask at all in the very beginning, the very, very beginning of all this. Fauci said, oh, no mask, no mask. So I don't think Phil Murphy has the guts to stand up to anybody, and no reason to. It's politically, hurtful for him. So unless the people are so upset at him that they force him to go against Biden, he'll never do it. He has no reason to. Democrats, I'm not asking you to vote for Citarelli if you're that crazy about not voting for a Republican who would basically be Democrat light. I'm saying don't vote for Murphy. Don't reward this guy for his lockdowns. Don't reward him for having businesses closed down while major corporations kept their stores open. No problem. That's not the Democrats of the 70s and 80s supporting the corporations and crushing the little guy. And that's exactly what it is. The unions will leave the Democrats probably within the next 5 to 10 years if they don't just do it soon. The Democrats also support CRT, and Gavin Newsom announced that CRT will be required for high schoolers. Do you want your kid to learn critical race theory, which is essentially racist Marxism? because that's what Murphy will sign on to. He might sign on in a different name, he might slow roll it in, but he's going to do it. All the teacher parent hoo-ha that's going on right now, Biden's turning up the juice on that. He'll sign on to it. Why wouldn't he? So, I'm not asking you to vote for Citarelli, although you could. I'm going to vote for Citarelli. I'll vote for anybody other than a Democrat these days. And I want Murphy gone. I urge you to at least consider not voting for him. If not, voting for the Republican, just to give him a shot, just to mix things up. You know, a worst case scenario, you'll have a Republican in and probably a very hostile Democrat legislature that'll be right on the bubble, if not totally Democrat. So that's a balance that keeps the other side in check. There's nothing keeping Murphy in check if you reelect him. He will lock down this state. He will push CRT. He will double down on everything. If you're going to vote for Murphy, well, enjoy Halloween, because that's going to be the last holiday you'll enjoy for a long time. I'm Tony D. Vote for Citarelli.